If you've spent any time on the internet, you've probably come across a fair share of scams. Scams have been around as long as the internet, and they don't have any sign of stopping. There are a few common places where scams stereotypically come from, India and Nigeria, but in these last years, something very interesting has been happening. With these countries becoming richer and more connected, people in Nigeria and India, as well as other developing nations, have become targets for the scams. These new scams use tactics that aren't really seen anywhere else, and can come from both within the country and outside the country. The now infamous pig butchering scams are prevalent, the unsolicited text messages from interesting strangers who always have an investment opportunity for you, but those are boring and aren't very different from how they work elsewhere. Where it gets interesting is the unusual phenomenon of fraudulent loan apps. Think those payday loan places, but in an app. I was really confused when I first heard about this. It sounds like a crazy idea, getting loans from some random app, but yes, they are a real thing, and they're very similar to the classic payday loan. The rise of these hasn't really been documented very well, and has flown under the radar of most media. Hundreds of these apps get taken down every month, and not many people outside these countries have heard about it. Because it's so unknown, a lot of what I'm going to talk about I've had to gather from anecdotes and articles from less reputable sources. How it works is a fraudster will spin up some app, almost always without a license, offering some type of loan. This can be anything from small personal loans in the tens of US dollars to fairly major business loans. There will often be various promises about your credit not mattering and the money being quickly deposited into your bank account. The app asks for all sorts of permissions, as well as for you to accept their dubious terms and conditions. A lot of developing countries have experienced big booms in digital payments and finance, so this idea of taking and managing loans from an app isn't out of place. Developing countries also need their population to have easier access to cash compared to developed countries, so loans are generally less restricted and more common to see. So, you've downloaded the app, and you're usually greeted with a simple, easy-to-use interface for your instant loan. The app will ask for your personal information for the loan, fairly standard things like your name, occupation, income, and identification, but frequently the app will also want more unusual information, like the names of family members and their incomes. From here, it's smooth sailing to get your loan. Put in your bank information and the amount of money you need, and it's transferred almost instantly, quick and painless, unlike the process of getting a normal loan from a legitimate bank. It's after this step where the problems and the scam kick in. It can take many different routes. Often customers don't get the full amount of their loan, with things like arbitrary and undisclosed fees sometimes taking over 40% of the payout. You still need to pay back the full amount, of course. There's other surprises waiting, too. The repayment period is often much shorter than is advertised, sometimes only giving days to pay back large loans. Couple that with the exorbitant interest rates, and these loans quickly become completely unmanageable. Clients often have to pay back over double the amount they took out. These loan apps became extremely popular when the pandemic first hit. Small businesses needing to cover the sudden loss of income turned to them, as did individuals who suddenly lost their jobs or had unexpected medical expenses. Even people who just hit a rough spot and needed a bit of extra cash turned to these greedy loan apps. The apps also often encourage reckless spending and don't fully explain the terms and plans that the users agree to. They often use flashy marketing and celebrities to get people to sign up.
20 लाख मिलेंगे या नहीं?
सर एक मिनट।
हेलो सर, हाउ मे आई हेल्प यू?
लोन चाहिए।
नो प्रॉब्लम सर, बस सैलरी स्लिप, बैंक स्टेटमेंट फिर वेरिफिकेशन चाहिए होगी सर।
अभी चाहिए।
3 बैंक हॉलिडे के बाद 4 वर्किंग डेज में पैसे आपके अकाउंट में आ जाएंगे सर।
अगले हफ्ते?
जी सर।
चलेगा।
भाई साहब, लोन चाहिए अपने टाइम पे, अपने हिसाब से। नावी ऐप डाउनलोड करो। 100% पेपरलेस प्रोसेस। 20 लाख तक का लोन विद इंस्टेंट बैंक ट्रांसफर। नावी, लोन अपने हिसाब से।
Loan apps advertise articles like top 6 road trips to take with a personal loan, neglecting to mention that taking a loan for an activity like that is an incredibly bad idea. But back to how the apps operate. If you were to take a payday loan in America and simply ignore it or never pay it, the typical process is you get a bunch of annoying phone calls, and maybe your credit score takes a hit. Worst case scenario is some collections officer shows up to lecture you. Pretty annoying, and this can very much come back to bite you if you want to buy a house or a car later down the line, but not life-ruining stuff. These scam loan apps are very different. They'll often start calling demanding repayment well before the deadline for repayment. It isn't long before these calls go from annoyances to threats of violence or serious legal trouble. Remember how the app wants access to all those phone permissions? This is where they use that. In the rare cases these loan apps even have a proper website, you can't proceed with getting your loan until you download the app. This is because they want to use your phone to blackmail and threaten you. Everyone's lives are now on their phones, and scammers having unrestricted access to all of that is, bad. Email accounts, banking information, photos, texts, contacts, and location data can all be stolen easily by these criminals. Using this, they can start to intrude into all aspects of their victims' lives. The constant phone calls are annoying, but they can be career-ruining when those calls go to the victims' bosses instead. The scammers will also attack the families of victims, bombarding them with constant calls as well as the victim. If that doesn't work, the scammers will resort to slander and defamation of their victims. There have been reports of scammers calling up victims' workplaces and making up crazy claims like the victim stealing from their employer to get them fired. Seems a little counterproductive when the scammer's goal is to extract money from these people. They often also steal photos of identification documents and other such sensitive information to make it challenging to get much of anything done. Some people have allegedly had blocks placed on their national identity numbers, making it hard to open bank accounts, get a job, or even get a passport or visa. The loan apps will often suggest to the victim that they take a loan from another app to pay back their current loan, only further perpetuating the cycle. The hidden fees, unreasonable terms, and threats and harassment start all over again and quickly become impossible to escape. The regulatory crackdown on these loan apps has been slow, but has been gathering pace in the last few years. Nigeria has been distinctly successful in shutting down these apps, going beyond merely having the apps taken down, but even raiding the offices of the apps and making hundreds of arrests. The Nigerian government has made great strides to certify additional legitimate loan services, essentially starving the fake ones out of the market. They've also created a dedicated hotline and task force to help individuals who've fallen victim to the scam. India has taken a less proactive approach, focusing on educating the public about these digital loan sharks. The Indian government has taken the opportunity to blame China for the issue. There is some evidence linking at least a few major loan apps to businesses in China, but most are from the country in which they operate, and the foreign influence is greatly overblown. It is much more likely that the scammers prefer to hide their money in bank accounts in China and claim to be Chinese to throw off law enforcement, who often have nothing to go on when pursuing these criminals. The phenomenon of deceitful loan apps is incredibly upsetting and frustrating, swindling innocent people simply trying to get by in countries with very difficult economic circumstances. It's hard to say if they're on their way out or only getting started. As finance becomes more digitized and more people gain access to the internet and the wider world, fraud will follow them. Governments and corporations will need to be proactive in countering this and future threats that will emerge.
You have reached the 651 area code test number in St. Paul, Minnesota for the Minneapolis LATA 628.